Hi everybody, welcome to the annual Center for Law and Technology and Society and eQuality Project lecture. So we do this once a year, and this year the topic is screening surveillance, and Saheli Singh will be speaking. Florian Martin-Barito, who is the head of CLTS, couldn't be here today, so I'm his substitute. But I'm also co-leader of the eQuality Project, which is one of the sponsoring projects here. And so I encourage you to watch for the CLTS lecture series as it continues to unfold over the winter term. And for those of you who are interested in AI and robots, look out for the We Robot conference that's coming up in early April. And I'm just going to turn it over to Valerie Steeves to introduce sava.
Hi. I co-lead the eQuality Project with Jane. And if you're not familiar with the project, we're a partnership of researchers, civil society organizations, educators, and policymakers that are really interested in exploring the impact of surveillance and network technologies in general on young people's experiences of privacy and equality. And because of our broad partnership, a lot of our effort goes into thinking of ways to make these consequences visible to people, so we can talk to them about it and support an informed public dialogue. I also work with the Big Data Surveillance Project, and that's how I met Sava. Sava Singh was working on her doctorate, which she's completed a few years ago, on academic Twitter. And she came to our attention because working in concert with the Big Data Surveillance Project, the eQuality Project was looking for really creative ways of creating publicly accessible conversations about surveillance. And a friend of ours, Helen Nissenbaum, said, "Oh, you've got to meet this student, Sava Singh. She's amazing." So David Lyon, who runs the Big Data Surveillance Project, got in touch with Sava, and we recruited her to come and do her first doc with that project, where she was responsible for creating what ended up being 3 short films that deal with different surveillance aspects, and you'll see one of them today. They've been incredibly well received. In June, Sava will receive the Award for Excellence in Artistic Responses to Surveillance at the Surveillance Studies Network, which is a very competitive award. So congratulations on that. The films have attracted other awards. And it's been a really interesting way to open these conversations. For example, yesterday Sava was talking to an undergrad class by Skype. They watched the film and then they had a conversation. For our purposes, one of the reasons why we wanted to continue this work with Sava as part of the eQuality Project is the ethic that she brought to the creation of these films. She just wasn't interested in surveillance and technology. She was interested in thinking about the intersectional aspects of the way this shapes our lives. And also, when she was putting the films together, carried that through and looked for real diversity from the Canadian filmmaking community. So I think she's produced 3 really interesting short films, and it's just been a pleasure working with her as a postdoc at the eQuality Project, and I'll now turn it over to her. Yay!
We should put off some of the lights, yeah.
That's better.
And then when it's film time, we'll put all of them down.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Dinner and a movie. It's nice. Try and figure out how this works. All right. So I'm going to repeat some of what Val said, but give you a little bit more detail about the project. So, as you now know, my name is Sava. And I want to start by thanking Jane and Val for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm so grateful for their support and for giving me this opportunity to share my work and engage with you all in a discussion of big data surveillance and digital labor. So today I'm going to give you a bit of background on the Screening Surveillance Project, and then we're going to watch one of the films. I'll tell you a little bit about the other films that I made before that. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about myself and how I came to this project. As Val said, I did my PhD at NYU in the Educational Communication and Technology program. And Oh, sorry. Someone texted me. Technology, in the Education, Communication, and Technology program, and I actually wrote my dissertation on academic Twitter, very different from all of this. It's happening again, sorry. So when it came time for me to find a job, like Bob was saying, I wasn't sure I was going to stay in academia, and but that's always conflicting because it's all I knew. So I'm like, oh God, okay, I have to get an academic job. And I was very pleased to see that the Surveillance Studies Center was looking for someone with a background in ed tech to work with them on a knowledge translation project for their big data surveillance project. Essentially take all the research they've done and try to create something that was an educational resource that was much more accessible to the general public and outside of our little surveillance studies bubble. So they wanted me to focus on issues that we're currently facing and soon to be facing with regards to big data surveillance. And I think at the time they were expecting someone who's more ed techy, but when I started thinking about what would be a good project for this, I talked to my husband who wrote A Model Employee and who I've worked with on other projects, similar projects like this, and he's done a lot of projects like this, and he said, why don't you ask them if they want to make some films? And I wasn't sure because, you know, it's an academic setting and, you know, you don't always get the chance to do creative work in there. And when I took it to them, they were actually really, really supportive of it and interested in doing it, and apparently had thought about it in the past, saying like, oh, we should make films and stuff. So it was very nice that that came together. Like they had wanted to do something like this, and I was like, well, here I am. So I applied for and got a grant with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada and made the 3 short films, of which you're going to see one. I have to say that the amount of support and trust that I received from the Surveillance Studies Center really made a difference. It was a pleasant surprise, and I'm very grateful to David Lyon and David Murakami Wood for trusting me with the project. And also I'm grateful for Clark Mackey for his mentorship. He's now retired, but he was a professor at the Film Studies department at Queen's. And I did not have any experience in filmmaking before this, so without him, this project would not have happened. I also want to acknowledge the incredible support that I've gotten from Val for my ongoing work and for this project. And I'm really, really grateful to be given the space and time to publicize the films and present the films at events and conferences. It's rare to get that kind of support and mentorship in academia. And I've had that both at Queen's and here. And like Val was saying, it's been, the response to the films have been really, really heartening. A lot of people I know have used them in classrooms across North America and Europe and stuff like that. And like I was saying, like yesterday I Skyped into a class in Toronto at Seneca College. And it was just, it's great. I love talking to students. They always come up with really great questions and things that I hadn't thought about in the films. I've talked to students in Cairo, I've talked to students in California, I've talked to students in Europe. It's just, I think my favorite thing is to talk to students and engage on the topics. And I feel like what we had set out for this project to be is being, and that's really just all I want. I want people to watch it and talk about the issues that come from the project. Also a quick note on the work that I'm currently doing with Val. I think you mentioned it when you were talking, like I'm working on a project called the Disconnect Challenge, which is a 2-week activity where students in Alberta will assess how technology affects their sense of connection with themselves and others. And we're very excited about the project because I think like 10,000 students over 10,000 students have signed up for that. And it's really great. It's a really great project because we're creating a space for young people to talk about the stuff that they're already talking about. Like they're not stupid. Everybody knows what's going on. And this is a really great way to have them have a conversation supported by like their teachers and family members and in a lesson plan and in a guided way. And we're really excited to see what happens with that. That's like next week, which is just like, we're like, yay. So back to the films. As I mentioned earlier, the Surveillance Studies Center felt that in light of recent surveillance developments, social media breaches, smart city ventures, workplace monitoring, we needed to pay more attention to and analyze the logics and practices that underpin, enable, and accelerate big data surveillance. As these interoperable systems map and monitor the movements and behaviors of populations, they cast long data shadows and draw inaccurate data portraits. The flaws of these systems remain points of academic discussion, but as these portraits are propelled forward in space and time, often perpetuating existing inequalities, more public input is needed on these futures and their implications for people and places. This is a GIF from a movie called The Great Hack. If you haven't seen it, it's talking a little bit about Cambridge Analytica and all of that stuff that happened. And I guess the gentleman who's walking there is David Carroll, who's a professor at the New School, who kind of started some of this stuff. It's an interesting film. So as part of the Big Data Surveillance Project, as I said, I, along with the Surveillance Studies Center, conceptualized and co-produced the 3 short films, of which you're about to see one. The narratives are informed by the research output, surveillance studies, and the Big Data Surveillance Project, and as well as more mainstream reporting. Like, there is reporting about this. We hear, some of it is a little bit panicky. It's like, oh no, this is happening. But in a sense, I feel like we should be panicking about this. We should be paying attention to a lot of this stuff. The films speculate surveillance futures and the effects of deeply embedded and connected surveillance systems on our everyday lives. We created them to be a public education resource to spark discussion and extend understandings of surveillance, trust, and privacy in the digital age. Each film focuses on a different entry point into big data surveillance and the tensions that manifest when the human is interpreted by the machine. These stories speak to surveillance as it can manifest in an everyday setting in which we have no choice but to be surveilled and our data used against us. And I want to stress the against us part here, because often we are sold this stuff as a way to make our lives more efficient or more safe, but we always end up at odds with this technology. So those are the film posters for each of the films, and I hope you get a chance to watch them. They're really great. I say that myself, but the filmmakers made them. It's more them than me. So I'm going to say a little bit about each of the films. Black Sites, which was written by Nihal El Hadi, who's an educator and writer out in Toronto, and directed by Josh Lyon, who's based in Kingston, follows Jay, a young student, as she navigates a stressful life as a student living with mental health issues. The film highlights what can happen when different data systems are connected and dependent. So a social media post affects Jay's access to her medication, and when she is forced to look elsewhere for help, she's faced with further dire consequences. This film was, when Nihal wrote this film, she was teaching at the time in Toronto, and she was inspired because when she was teaching, there were students in her classroom that she could tell was struggling with stuff outside of the class. And she kind of created space in that class to let students come and talk to her about that so that she could help them and support them through what they needed to do for school versus deal with what's going on at home and all this stuff. So there's a lot going on for students today, and it's getting a lot more, and technology kind of helps and exacerbates that in different ways. So that's what inspired her to write this story about Jay, kind of dealing with her life at school and her mental health issues and trying to get access and do this and do that. This film was also shot entirely in Kingston on the coldest day last winter. So we were out there, and it took me an hour to sit in a tub and warm up again after. In the next film, In Frames, which was written by Madeline Ashby, who's a writer out of Toronto, and directed by Farhad Pakhtel, who is a filmmaker out of Montreal, we try to speculate the effect of trusting smart technologies to interpret human behavior. In the film, a smart city tracks and analyzes a woman walking through the city, making certain assumptions about her based on her actions. But are these assumptions correct? So this was slightly different from the other films in the sense that it's still critical of the way that we are surveilled and what that data says about us. But this is a city or a system which now exists, and within this, we're trusting these systems and these machines to make certain decisions about us. But can they really tell what's going on with us? We often, I don't know sometimes if, my partner or my friends or someone are going through something. How are we leaving it to certain kinds of data systems and machines, so to speak, to make those decisions about us? I won't say anything about a model employee because we're going to watch that, and then we can talk about it after. I very specifically wanted to center women of color in these narratives, not just for representational reasons, but also to highlight the fact that surveillance technologies affect Black people, other folks of color, indigenous people, trans people, and other marginalized populations far more than anybody else. And amongst those groups, women, especially Black women and trans women, often they're the ones who bear the brunt of the oppressive nature of these technologies. Many of the surveillance and algorithmic and data analysis systems are built on racist, white supremacist histories. So I very deliberately asked writers and the filmmakers to make these narratives centering women of color. And I also want to do that because I'm a woman of color. And while I'm quite privileged when compared to a lot of other people, I'm also less so when compared to further other people. It's always a little contextual, isn't it? I also realized that we created these 3 somewhat dire narratives that centered women of color, so it feels a little heavy. And I realized that, like, because I dealt with each film separately, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I've now made 3 films about, you know, women of color having a really hard time. But I think what we're trying to do with that is very important. Like, I hope it's highlighting what we need to highlight and what the problems are. So some of you are probably already familiar with these works. Yes, I read the paper that many of you were meant to read before you came to this. But for really great scholarship that connects the histories of slavery to our current surveillance state, please read Simone Brown's work, especially her book Dark Matters. And for more on how these systems are hugely biased, you can read Safiya Noble's book, Algorithms of Oppression, Ruha Benjamin's book, Race After Technology, and Virginia Eubank's book, Automating Inequality. And I did notice that all of these books, I think, were referenced in the paper that you all read. These are important works that really uncover the deep and distasteful histories of so much that we take for granted today. Nothing is neutral, and to believe that things are neutral is increasingly, to me at least, a position of deliberate ignorance if we're not kind of tackling the histories that led to where we are right now. In addition to featuring women of color, I wanted to note that each story is about an act of resistance. Not resistance in the sense of pushing against a system, but resistance in the sense of trying to survive despite the pressure from the surveillance systems they find themselves having to live in. Each story is about reclaiming agency, about the protagonist trying to find space for themselves in a system that polices and limits the spaces they're allowed to be in. Each of these stories is about trying to live with surveillance while also having an actual life, with varying results, most often unfortunate. Like I said, these make for some grim viewing, and I'd like to be sensitive to everyone here and note that the content might be disturbing to some, as it covers issues of performance anxiety and social and familial pressures. But they do bring important issues and struggles to life, and hopefully that helps us think about, talk about, and act on the oppressive systems we allow in our lives. So without any further delay, let's watch A Modern Play. I am going to go to that. Screen. Is it full screen? Not yet. Should I say? Yeah. Can I get a bigger screen? I'm not sure how to make it sound up here. That's the full screen. Turn it on. Oh, here we go. I think it's this little guy. There we go. Should I pause it again?
Should there be some now?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very quiet, so we need to find them all. We couldn't get into the room early because there was a class in here, but I think this just is a nice concrete example of the state of constant connectivity, instantaneity that we all live in because of technology. We did
Pressing harder. Maybe from here?
Yeah, it should be.
It's gone into the red, but we'll see.
Try it and see what happens. Oh, yeah.
Let's see if it's true.
Now you can hear it.
Is that too loud?
Yeah, I know. I don't know how to see. Are the lights back there?
sorry.
Say it again. 4th time this week.
I know, my teacher got me held up in class.
Always excuses. No improvement.
I said I'm sorry, okay?
Well, come. Got something to eat. There's going to be some change around here, okay?
What kind of changes? Are you gonna fire me?
No, I'm not going to fire you. I told your mom I'm going to protect you. Just some improvement. We're going to improve your work around here, okay? I have something for you that's going to help you. Here.
What is this? Some sort of Fitbit or something?
It's kind of. Put it on.
Okay. What does it do? Where did you get this?
It's a new company. They're helping me modernize my business. We're going to move into the 21st century. It's a new era, Nita.
Oh.
Here. I'm putting all your details here. Okay? So we initialize it. There you go. Should be set up.
Oh, I think it worked.
Great. Okay, most important thing is compulsory that you wear it when you're at work, but it's optional outside of work.
All the time?
Yes,
I never take it off?
I would like it if you wear it even to sleep,
Why?
because it gives you benefits.
What kind of benefit?
Bonuses, you're going to get discounts, you're going to get time off work.
I don't know.
You don't want to make money? Come on, what's wrong?
I guess.
Yeah, go for it, it's fine.
What do I do now?
You just have to read this and there we go, good stuff.
There'll be more. Go through some.
Sorry, I just fell asleep for a second. Hold on. Let me get ready. I'll be right there. Is Mom working the late night shift at the hospital again tonight?
Yeah, she is. Are you staying out late again?
Mr. Singh asked for some plants, by the way.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye.
My sister was giving me all the shit for going out tonight. I know.
Suzuki?
I think so. Hold on, I'm getting a text.
What is it? Your phone keeps like blowing up.
Ugh. So annoying. Whatever. Let's just go inside. I'm gonna miss my set.
Peter, come inside. You know, we've had you on this model employee thing for 1 week, right? And it doesn't look like it's going very well. Your performance is very poor. Well, come sit up. Let's have a look.
What do you mean?
Well, can you see the charts? Top.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The red. It's all you.
But what about all the green stuff?
The green stuff is the other employees. That's what you should be following. You know, you're very slow. You're not taking in the online orders fast enough. And you're idle a lot of the time. It's not looking good. I
But
don't like you to come to work tired. You've been partying too much, going to dodgy parts of town. What you do on your free time is up to you. But I don't like you coming in to work late and coming in tired. Okay?
But does this mean that I'm not going to get the bonus?
No.
But I've been wearing this all
I
day.
know you're wearing that. Look, see the reds? They have to turn green. Okay? Otherwise, you're not getting a bonus. You might be looking for a new job.
But you said...
That's it. We need you to improve. Okay?
Okay, well, I guess I'll just get back to work.
Okay.
Sorry. Where's Mom?
At work. Lucky for you.
What do you mean?
She's mad. So mad.
At me?
Yeah, at you. She knows what you've been doing. Staying out all night, partying.
Don't lie. Who told her? Mr. Singh?
I don't know. You can ask her yourself. She'll be back any minute. What? What are you looking at me like that for?
Peter, got a sec?
Yeah, what's up?
Well done. You're really doing a great job.
Oh,
So
thank
much
you.
better. I'm really glad that you're taking your job seriously.
Thank you.
Yeah, and everything's going really well. The only thing is I think you're sleeping a little bit too much. Right? And you're not getting out of the house at all. Yeah?
I'll try.
You should go out sometimes, eh? You should get out, go get some exercise, eh?
Okay, I'll try.
And go have some fun, okay?
Alright, does this mean I'm gonna get a bonus?
Yes, you will. Come on. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Of course,
you.
come on.
Alright, I'll get back to work. Is Mama?
Yep. You know, I better not get any trouble wearing that for you. I don't want to risk losing my scholarship.
You'll be fine. Calm down.
Yeah, you know the only reason they're making you wear this is so that they can learn how you do your job? So they can replace you with a robot?
It's not like I'm gonna be working at a restaurant for the rest of my life.
Sure, but it's more complicated than that.
They want to replace all the people with robots. And what? Who cares?
Me, I care. I still want there to be jobs for people when I get out of college.
Well, at least I can afford DJ equipment now.
You know they're going to replace DJs with robots too, right?
Whatever, Brainiac. Don't work too hard.
Wait, what about the plan for Mr. Singh?
far from the restaurant. I had a message from a morning employee saying someone tried hacking into the system, and I called the security company. Did you give your watch to Rupa? Oh my God, what did you do?
So as you know, my cyberfeminism students are amongst the members of the audience here, and so one of the issues that we obviously talk a lot about is relates to both intersectionality and to equality more broadly. And you kind of touched on the equality issues a bit earlier, but I wondered if you could say a bit more about what the equality issues are in the context of surveillance technologies like the one here and perhaps in the other films as well.
Like you said, I said a little bit about equality earlier in terms of who gets unequally affected by a lot of these technologies. And I think those people who don't always have political, social, or economic agency or power in a lot of these systems aren't able to advocate for themselves or have any say in what happens. And I think I also want to say, like, in this case, it's like you have Mr. Singh and you have Neeta, and they have a very familial relationship. Like he says, you know, your mom told me to look after you, and, you know, that's how she has that job, and he's looking out for her and helping her have this job and get some of that, you know, make a little bit of money and all of this. And through the whole thing, while she's putting that on, she's still saying, why am I doing this? What is it? Why? She's asking these questions. It's not like she's unaware, but in that setting, she doesn't have the power to be like, no, I don't want to be tracked in this way. Also, it's like a loving relationship. So a lot of times what we don't realize is that even in settings where there are people we trust and family and kin and friends and stuff like that, we trust them and we find ourselves in those situations at their like request to some degree. And it's like they don't understand what they're doing either, but he believes that he's, you know, doing better for the business, he's gonna, you know, get better. So all of the reasons why people do some of this stuff is in order, like in a weird way, in order to make themselves better, to get better lives, to do all of that. And that's what I think there's like layers and layers of stuff that are happening there. Like the inequalities get more and more complex as the different players are in there, and the systems is doing what it's doing in that way, right? So I think it's really kind of, it really affects me to think about how he really cares for her, and he doesn't understand what he's putting her in, right? And she understands it, but she doesn't know how to kind of protect herself from that, because we just take all of these systems for granted. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I know, and I did think when I watched the film the first time, I thought it was interesting that it added complexity, that it was in the context of a relationship, an ongoing relationship of care, and involving racialized people. And what you feel in the background is a sort of the broader sort of corporate hand that's representing larger systems of power at play, right? Where people are being sold a bill of goods about why this is good for them,
Yes,
and why this is good for society. So I thought that I liked that sort of element of complexity to the story.
Yeah, it's like it's abstracted out, right? Like whatever that system is doing, and which is why we kind of focused on that very like caring relationship. Like he's like an uncle to her, and it's heartbreaking because at some level, and then her sister gets involved in it, and so like part of it is like who gets implicated in these things because of what we're doing or what we're trying to do. And poor Mr. Singh now has this system that he still thinks is helping him, but under his care, both these young women have had their lives kind of turned upside down in some way, right?
One of the things I wanted to ask just before we open it up to everybody else, reflects the fact, as you said, that this particular technology is nested within a community where there are these relationships, and the impact of the surveillance becomes readily apparent to the people, because even at the beginning it's like, oh, I've been watching you for a week, you're red, you're not green. And I find as we work together on other projects, we're always faced with trying to make the consequences of surveillance visible to people when it recedes into the background. So that technology I have to put on my arm. I know when it's there. I get alerts on my phone. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about what happens when those forms of monitoring recede into a smart environment and shape our interactions, but in ways that we don't actually physically interact with or see slap us across the face, like, getting arrested by the cops because you got your sister's Fitbit on.
Yeah, yeah. No, and like you said, one of the film's frames deals very much with that issue, which is like what happens in a smart city where we're not using things to track ourselves in very obvious ways, and all of this is happening in the background. I think part of the point of the films is to make some of that apparent. We don't, but while still kind of occluding what's going on. So we know that something's going on, but we don't understand what it is. And I think we all feel this. I mean, I still have a phone and I'm still on certain social media and everything. It's something we can't not do anymore in some cases, right? If you want to participate in society or in work or in studying or whatever, we have to buy into some of this. And I think smart cities and smart technologies take this, like you said, and then push it further away. And we don't realize it until it comes for us. And that's part of the problem. Like, until you get affected by it, you don't understand what those consequences can be. And that's scary, because by the time you get affected by it, you get arrested or something, right? Or we don't know if it's private security, whatever. Either way, your life is changed. Like, the stakes of making a mistake are so big now. Like, if something goes wrong in the past, your parents would like have a talk with you or something. There was a different level. Now the scale is like, the system is like, we've tagged you as a bad person, and that will follow you forever, right? And so it's very unnerving to know that there are things picking things up about me and making decisions about me that may not affect me right now. Like, I'm reasonably privileged. I mean, when I travel, I'm not as privileged. Like, there are various different contexts within various things happen. But right now, I can still say, like, right, yeah, I have my phone and it's not done anything bad to me yet. But that could change very quickly. And so it's important for us to be aware, push back, hold accountable, all of these things as they're unfolding. A lot of this stuff was put in place because of Silicon Valley's kind of approach to, like, shoot first, ask questions later, move fast, break things, all of this stuff. And they were doing stuff before we understood the implications of that stuff. They often did understand that, right? They were like, yeah, we knew you were getting like a dopamine hit when you were, doing social media stuff, but we wanted the money, we wanted advertising, we wanted to do that. So they didn't care that it was going to affect us. We are now at a time when I think there's more and more widespread understanding, or at least people are listening to what's happening, and there are examples everywhere in education, in like life, in like retail, everywhere. And I think it's good that more and more of us are paying attention, but we also need to step in the face like, what do we do with this now? We understand that we don't understand what's going on. How do we kind of say, hey, listen, this is not on, you can't do this to us, and we can't wait till it affects us directly. We have to understand that it's already affecting a lot of people, and we don't always see that either. So algorithms that we're looking at on social media, I'm not going to tell you always that stuff is going down, but it's like, yeah, we need to step up. We need to kind of be like, yeah, no, we're not going to let this happen. And part of me saying this, but sometimes, you know, I feel like I talk to people, I'm like, you have to be the asshole in the room that says, I disagree, I don't agree, I don't consent.
Use Google Docs when we're doing research together.
Yeah, it's like, I don't consent to this being done to me. And if enough of us say that, then, you know, we have to be reckoned with, right?
It's really disruptive. One of the things I find fascinating is that when you do that, you're considered rude.
Yes.
So the fact that Google is, you know,
or
wrinkling through and
pathetic.
everything. Oh, well,
Or
true.
pathetic.
Yeah. Or just old in our case.
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to add one thing, because you said in the intro that all of these films have to do with agency. And I think in this particular film, you can see how the technology constrains what that person is able to do in her life. One of the things I like about the set of films together, the three of them together, is they also speak to subjectivity, how these technologies shape who we can be. Not just what we can do and can't do, but who we actually can be. And a system that is privileging efficiency and productivity is not going to allow you know, you to take your time and put it into something like being a disc jockey, because that's just not who you're expected to be to fit into the system, to be slotted in.
Very much
So I thought that was a real value added of the three films together.
No, that's a really great point. It really draws boundaries around where you can go, who you can be, how you can be, and
Yeah.
that's really important. We don't always see that. We're just like, oh yeah, I can't do this now, so I'll just do this other thing. But it's like, yeah, that's a scary.
Especially when you add in the discriminatory, misogynist, racist, systemic tropes around it.
Very much so.
Okay, so do we have questions from the audience?
I very much enjoy the subject. Well, maybe first talk about a specific area of public education, and then go into like my more general question because of the comments. In a public school setting these days, there's a company that provides an educational platform to public schools. I won't name the company.
Google or Facebook.
Take your pick,
Mostly
Microsoft,
Google.
Amazon.
Oh, Microsoft.
I'm interested about consent. So
Nah, they're not.
Yeah, consent is it's not meaningful consent is what I'm finding right now. I'm concerned about my children. One child in grade 2 class searched topless women. Images came up. The child gets scolded by the teacher, but what concerns me is that search is following that child for life. That there's a permanence to that search that simply is not the same when you're dealing in a non-digital context. I'm sure in high school, their teenagers will, for the sake of argument, might write a paper about defending Nazism. That type of, it might just be for the sake of argument, but that type of paper is permanent. If we were in the U.S., like that type of, those types of searches or papers, if that child tries to become the U.S. president, you can be pretty sure those types of searches or papers are going to come back to haunt them.
Or
Actually, in that
it might
case,
make
it would
sure
help
they
them
get
get
elected.
elected.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sadly, I don't think that's the outcome we were hoping for.
Right. But, so I wonder, like in a more general sense, can you comment about data permanence and then what that means in terms of surveillance and in terms of choice, and particularly in compelled context. Public schooling and public education is not a choice. And yet, if you don't consent, it plays into access to education. I am that one character in the room who said no consent, and I can tell you it's very difficult. I'm encountering all sorts of trouble on almost on a daily basis. So I'm wondering if you can comment as well, like on limits of data use. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, sure, maybe Google is using all these data points to provide different types of math exercises to children, but there's nothing as far as I can find that limits what they're going to do with that data. So what does that mean for... I'm really perplexed about this.
As we all are, I think it's and I think it's further complicated by the fact there aren't always good examples of how we can deal with this. So there is like right to be forgotten, and there's certain movements in places that are trying to tackle some of this. And I think, you know, thank you for being the parent in the room that was like no consent, but how do we kind of, you know, gather all the parents together and be like, all right, it's an institutional problem. Like, how far does this go? Who's getting paid for it? Who's, you know, and if we're not poking at that, so, you know, the school system is within this other system, and then all of these mandates come down from places saying like, we have to use this now, and then there's no kind of conversation with the people who are going to be forced to use it on what that looks like. And it's frustrating because I think a lot of the folks that I've talked to have been educators and administrators in higher education and in public education and stuff like that, and say like, we are powerless because we know that this exists, but we're forcing our students to participate in this, and we don't know how to change that or stop that or question that. And it's really hard, and I think one of the ways to do it is to organize, to come together, to you know, to hold, like make institutions have that conversation and be like, okay, what's going on here? What does it mean? How do we stop this? Because it's not like your child is curious about stuff and would normally come and ask you or do something or whatever, and it's okay for children to be curious and look for things, but for that to like be a mark on them. So like you were saying, we're also limiting or controlling their kind of curiosity and finding their own limits and learning about stuff and all of this stuff. And it's like, I don't know the answer per se, but I think there are groups and organizations and advocacy groups that are trying to push back on this, and we need to find those groups within our kind of communities and say, all right, how do we get together and how do we make a larger noise about this to make something happen? You can say more things about it.
Actually, the Equality Project is doing 3 things that I think are relevant to your question, and you're involved in some of them. The first one is we talk to kids. So we spent the last 2 years talking to a lot of kids, mainly in focus groups, but in different parts of the country. And one of the things that's really surprised me as we've gone through that process in different projects with different kids, looking at different intersectional groups of kids, that without asking them, I've had kids in every project we've done say, what is wrong with you adults? Why do you make us use these tools in our education? For heaven's sakes. If I'm doing research, I'd much prefer to go to a library, because then I get this thing called a book, and somebody selected the information that's gone into it. It's more useful for me. One of the big pushbacks was when Microsoft gave everybody tablets, and the science and math teachers were told that they had to require their students to do their math and science homework on tablets so they could submit it electronically, so it could be graded electronically. And I don't know about you, but like doing anything, even simple math with, you know, it's not linear. We don't think in a linear way. So I think that's a really good thing, because the people in the school, in the classroom that matter the most are students. And they're saying, this does not suit our purposes. Sure, we'll use technology for some stuff, but not for all of it. We've also done research over the years with teachers who say the same thing, that tech is great when it helps us meet a curricular outcome, but it sucks when we use it when it gets in the way of a curricular outcome. Even simple things like there's litigation, and I believe it's in Vermont. I've also, through research, heard the same story in Ontario and down in the Maritimes as well, where a child simply cannot look at a screen for 8 hours. In Vermont, the litigation is because the child has seizures. So the parents went to the school and said, okay, my kid can't look at this screen, so stop putting them in front of them. And they were told in a number of different instances in a number of different school systems, we can't educate your child then, which is insane. So when you talk about public education and equity, And I don't think this is an accident. So another thing that we've done through the Equality Project is we've taken a deep dive into the legal terms of use and the privacy policies that are associated with personalized learning technologies. So this isn't just Johnny searched for, you know, naked women or whatever. This is software that collects finger tensility, tracks eye movement, looks for signals of boredom. So the child will come into the classroom, be told by a screen, you go over there and sit at terminal number 12, and then they're served lessons, and then they have to get an exit ticket when they're completed the lesson, and then the computer tells them if they have done a good enough job. And if they do, then they get a new lesson the next day. So these systems have not been designed by accident. So one of the things that I had a lot of fun doing with our colleague Chris Reagan as part of the Equality Project, Jane's worked on these things as well, and the four of us, or three of us, I can't count, have been approaching this from different angles. But Chris and I looked at the big tech company foundations that are pouring huge amounts of money into these systems. And it's a really interesting analysis, because when you talk to teachers, they look at education as something that occurs in relationships between teachers and students, where you develop community and trust and create spaces for exploring and making mistakes. Whereas the big tech organizations are promoting a very different kind of technology that's very managerial, that's very controlled, that can be broken down into bits and bytes. And it's not consistent with the value of public education in a democracy. It's just not. And that was published in First Monday if you're interested in that. The third thing we've done that I think responds to your comments is that we've worked with teachers in Alberta and teachers in Ontario, both put them in the same room with the privacy commissioner of each of those provinces. And we've had full-day workshops where we bring people together and say, well, here's what we know when we looked at the terms of use, what kind of issues you're having. And one of the big takeaways for me from those two workshops was teachers telling us that we need to be able to push back against the companies themselves. So the provincial ministries are looking for ways to save money. The school boards are not happy with this. The teachers are not happy with this. But they're negotiating contracts, a little Ottawa Carleton District School Board, little tiny gnat on the floor, against Microsoft over access or Gmail, that kind of stuff. And they said there's such an inequality of bargaining power. So we worked with the Privacy Commissioner's office to see if they could add their weight and sit at the table with them when they're negotiating appropriate standards. And they've been somewhat successful. But I think one of the problems goes to your notion of informed consent. So when my daughter, who's now in law school, was in kindergarten, she came home and she said, Mommy, I talked to a doctor today and they asked me all sorts of questions about whether you hit me. And I go, I don't hit her, so it's, you know, it's not like I have something to hide, because that's all we worry about with privacy, right? But I'm going, excuse me? So I call up the school, and my daughter had been enrolled in a research project that was being run by CHIO. And the school board had consented on my child's behalf. They did the same when they put out that first survey where they wanted to collect demographics in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. They just researched a bunch of kids. They gave all kids in grades 7 and 8, all female children in grades 7 and 8, it's a controversial vaccine for yeah, that one, without any parental consent. So I think it actually speaks to an underlying managerialism in the way we approach education. So anything we can do to feed the healthy social relationships and conditions that allow us to come together as a community, I think are even like super important, basically what you were saying.
Yeah, it's tough for teachers because there's on one hand a lot of pressure on teachers to not appear as if they're falling behind the times by not using these technologies. But on the other hand, for the most part, there's no centralized guidance. So they actually don't know what the privacy policy of the platform is. So I was just actually, I'm on a listserv that was just talking about how York region, which is a massive region, their board had just hired a privacy officer whose job it is to start thinking about these things, right? So what technologies are we rolling out? Because a lot of it is very, like Google's not ad hoc, believe me. That's it. And I was told when my kids were required to sign up that that part of the contract with the board was that Google would not be tracking the data from kids that as they were using the educational apps. But the point of that is, that's fine. But even if that were true, the whole point of getting in on the ground floor is creating a captive audience who, once they're an adult, then they're addicted to your platform and your tools, and now you can get their data when they're adults, right? So there's a lot structurally that needs to go on, and teachers are left like twisting in the wind a little bit in a lot of cases because they aren't getting centralized guidance on these issues. So I think as we're looking for allies, I think teachers are potential allies too.
Oh, yeah. Just to put a number to that, in our team meeting, the Alberta Privacy Commissioner has been having meetings with teachers around this, and it was a remote rural area, and one school board had contacted them because they had, was it 8,000 or 4,000? How many? 3,000 apps had been installed on their server, and each of those apps was leaking information to the app provider, and they were all installed without permission by the board. So it's a mess.
No, I don't. You, and then we'll get to you, and then you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add a little bit about the parents, because my observation has been that as time goes on and these tools appear in the classroom, parents are left more outside of understanding what exactly they are working on, what projects are they working on, because most of them occur in the classroom or with platforms. So unless you sit right beside them and see what exercises and what content and whatever, I mean, it's impossible on a day-to-day when you're busy as well. And they need to do this 10 stars times 3 to comply to some homework. It is absolutely impossible. And there is also the issue of when exactly are you talking to the teacher? To ask those questions, to understand the privacy implications or how these tools work. Because there is the meeting at the beginning of the year, this is myself, this is my classroom, this is what I'm going to do. There are no questions, right? Too early. Then the first bulletin, second bulletin, if your child doesn't have any issues or major issues, you're discouraged.
Yeah, they
and
do.
I have been one of those parents who tends to go until grade 6. And they're looking at me like I'm crazy. Why exactly are you sitting here wasting my 15 minutes when your child doesn't have a problem? And questions that are a little bit more pointed about tools, about amount of time on screens and stuff like that, I'm like, really, really not welcome. Get to grade 7, and it's a free-for-all. It's like, okay, 2 hours, you meet the teachers. Good luck to you finding the teacher that is in your class, your kid's homework. I mean, it's absolutely discouraged. So there is no meaningful dialogue, and there are no welcome questions from parents at all.
I think we should gather. I should do a better job of keeping track of this, but I think in efforts to, engage with schools and teachers and stuff like that, we should collect examples of where stuff has happened. I think there are, you brought up a couple of good examples. Students too are allies. Like we should empower the students to question this stuff and stand up for themselves as well. I think there are kids in a school in Brooklyn a few years ago kind of walked out and said, no, we don't want you to force us to do this. And so it's action like that from the ground up, and then hoping that everybody else comes to the table and has that conversation. It's rough, but at least we're talking about it, which means we're wanting to do something about it. And I think that's at least a step in the right direction, right? Did you have something you wanted to say?
Just that I know there's a lot. I've spoken to a lot of my other parents at my child's school, but a lot of people have the same concern, but their backs are against the wall. They say, if I don't sign that consent form, then what? My child is falling behind.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I found with my children. It took constant, basically badgering till we seemed to have a paper notebook. And it took 7 weeks into the school year before we got a paper notebook for math exercises. And for the first 7 weeks, while my child's classmates were doing math online, he sat there and either watched them or read.
This is,
While they're doing math.
we need to organize together. It's like collective organizing and getting all, you know, if 3 parents are saying if we don't sign the consent, what happens? It's like, all right, let's get all the parents to not sign the consent and then we'll see what happens. You know what I mean? Like you get enough people together to kind of stand up for that. And that's hard to do too, because all parents are like, well, I want my kid to do okay. I don't want to
Well,
be
the other thing is that learning technology is painted as progress. So do you want your kid to have the skills for the 22nd century or don't you? Right? Like that's the way it's presented. But my husband's an elementary school principal, so just I think I think we have to be careful about how we're thinking about teachers as well, because teachers are in a really weird position.
Yeah.
Because again, it's very much emphasized that if they're not doing this, then they're falling behind. Right? So I think that the more we can think of teachers as allies, the better off I think that will be.
Though at the same time, I think we have to use research when we can too. So my second year class, undergrad, I always start by saying if you take notes on your laptop, the research consistently tells you will do 5 to 10% more poorly than students who take notes by paper. You know, and I leave it up to them, but I think it's important that we realize that actually the technologies you're using don't necessarily make it easier for you to learn, whether you're an undergrad or in law school. And we have established systems of doing things that actually are preferable because you get better learning outcomes. So I think it's important, like if you look at there's no research, all the money they've poured into personalized learning. There's not a single study, even when they pay for it, that says, oh, gee, personalized learning works. It always performs less well than you know, teachers in a classroom talking to kids and learning together. So part of we're rolling these out for all sorts of reasons. We might be assuming that this is because it improves education, and I think we have to stop assuming that. We have to start challenging that because it's definitely not true.
We had a question back there.
Yeah, so probably one of the, first of all, thank you so much for the film. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You've probably come across a major justification of the surveillance state as this balance of public safety in comparison to privacy, and how much of our privacy are we willing to give up for our safety. And you know, terrorism's on the rise across the world. I don't think that we'll disagree with that. You see cities like New York, cities like London, that are putting CCTVs on every corner. Now they're even deploying facial recognition technology on top of that, and AI and different learning capabilities. So I guess my question is it a balancing act, or can they be mutually exclusive and still protect the individual's privacy and safety at the same time?
The short answer is like no. It's a lot of the research has talked about how having increase of like CCTV cameras and stuff like that actually doesn't reduce crime in a lot of areas. So a lot of this stuff, again, it's a complex system of things, and it's important for us to look at who's benefiting from any of these things. The sad thing is that it's very easy for us to say, yes, I want to be safe, and I want my family to be safe, and I want to protect the people I love. And a lot of these technologies and companies use that emotional hook to get you to do this thing. Like Ring cameras right now, the doorbell cameras and stuff like that. A lot of people have them, and a lot of it is sold to people as a way of like, well, you got to keep your porch safe, you got to keep your family safe, all this stuff. And it's easy because I do want to keep my people safe. I want to keep everybody I love really, really safe. But we have to look at what the fallout of that is. Police departments have direct access to those cameras. Some of those cameras are inside the house. Some of this is outside the house. A lot of people are like, well, I have nothing to hide, like you said, until it comes for you. If you're racialized in a particular way, your gender, where you live, a lot of these things, if you look at the system, you look at the research, all of it falls on poorer, people of color, all of that falls on them. You have to understand that those systems are doing a particular thing. We have to look at the roots of the system. We have to look at who are the companies, who's benefiting from it, who's making the money. If you follow the money, you see where some of that is. A lot of the reasons that they give you for putting these things in place through research have shown that it doesn't actually have the kind of impact that they're telling you it has. So a lot of it is about control rather than safety. And that's something.
Commodification.
Sorry?
And commodification.
And commodification, very much so. So it's tough to do that because, like I said, I do want the people I care for to be safe, but is this the way that that's kept safe? A lot of money is poured into policing. What do police do? They look at us as adversaries, right? They'll come into a situation with a gun, with a taser, with some sort of thing to like subdue you. Instead of putting money into community centers that help like provide housing, that provide safety for drug users. So instead of actually tackling the social issues that would lead to people not needing to want to steal something. Like crime is dependent on how you look at it. I'm stealing this piece of bread because I'm dying of hunger. But somebody else sees it as like, I am stealing, you know what I mean? So that's a lot of the social issues that give rise to some of this stuff are not dealt with, and that's part of the problem. So instead of pouring money into more militarized police state, it makes sense to go to a community and be like, what do you need? Do you need a home? Well, here's a home. Do you need a place where you can safely go and your kids can play or your kids can be looked after? All right, let's do that. So I think it's very complex. It's gotten very big, so it's really hard to have like a very straightforward, simple answer. I mean, I said no at the beginning because that's true, but we have to look at, and it's a long-term thing. It's not a quick fix. The technology is not a quick fix, and the social issues that we have to fix are not. None of this is a quick fix. We have to take time, look at what people need, go to communities, try and fix it from that space. Does that make sense? Okay. I think we have time for one more question. There's someone here who's had their hand up for a long time. Go ahead.
So, with elements of biometrics, video being more integrated into everyday technology, like, how can someone meaningfully like withdraw their consent from participating? Like, is it possible? Because like there is all of this rhetoric about, oh yeah, even in like cyberspace with technology, you can withdraw your consent, and it just seems like a very policy term. Is it possible on a practical level? There need to be some form of like local GDPR kind of thing? I guess what are your
I think that we've got a collective community problem, and it's only in particular industry's interest to keep up a rhetoric of individualism. Well, you can opt out, you can do this, you can do that, when they know that they're actually building a system that's designed to make it practically impossible for you to opt out, even if you realize that there was some reason why you should. And at the same time, we have got money being spent, we have education systems to implicate technology deeper and deeper and deeper in every aspect of our lives. So to actually function, we wind up having to be engaged. So then to create an atmosphere like that, and then as the government, for example, to sort of step back and rely on some notion of individuals consenting or not consenting is just, it's preposterous. And so to me, there does need to be regulation. I don't know what, I'm not saying exactly what that looks like, but we do have to, it's a collective community problem, and there need to be collective community responses to that. And we can't just sort of throw up our hands and say, well, this will undermine progress, or we can't get in the way of progress, or just educate individuals and they'll figure out what to do. I think we've gotten to a place where we're so far beyond that.
It's also interesting to note that, like, when you talk about facial recognition and stuff, I want to just, if we take a look at, and we talk about Silicon Valley because a lot of this is born there, right? If we take a look there, they just banned facial recognition technology, right? And you're like, you made it though. Like, so, you know, what is that position where they made it and it's now foisted upon the rest of the world, but they get to choose not for it not to affect them? Also, if you look at a lot of, like, there are always stories about how the CEOs of these companies send their kids to schools that play with wooden blocks.
Yeah.
They're not allowed technology.
Go to Waldorf
So
schools.
it's like, at some level, it's like, well, what's happening here? And you can see that, you know, they're aware of what's going on, but it's dollar signs. And like Jane was saying, it is a community problem. I don't think that individual opting in or opting out has an effect or is meaningful in any way, because, like you said, it is a bigger problem. I can opt out of certain things, but I'm kind of the odd one out. Like, I was just telling a couple people before the talk that I'm taking a French class, and the professor there announced that, well, I've created a Facebook group, and that's where I'm going to put all the slides and all of the materials that come out of the class. And I was the only one who stood up in class and said, I don't have Facebook. And so now I have to email him at the end of every class and say, can you send me stuff? In the meantime, there's this Facebook group, and stuff is happening there, and people are talking to each other, and I'm not part of that. But so in my opting out, I'm fortunate that it's not going to affect me too badly. Like, I'm okay. I'll be fine if I don't talk to everybody else in the class, right? But it's like, opting out has made me the odd person out too. And when I talk to other people in the class, like, we don't use it, we don't like it. But it's like, all right, then why didn't all of us say, no, you need to find a different way to do this? But it's like, it is a policy level thing, it is a regulation level thing, and there are examples like GDPR and stuff like that we need to kind of keep looking at and be like, how do we apply this so that we are protected? It's not about individuals, it is about a community problem. And I think we can come together. I honestly believe that we can come together and make this happen. Like, today is a good day. Usually I'm just like, oh no, it's all over, why do I even bother? And then other days I'm like, you know what? No, I have hope. I feel like we can come together and really affect change, and we can still flip this around in a way that protects all of us and all our loved ones and everything.
All right. Okay, so I want to